I bought a used TV that can show me the future. Something bad happens in a week. Written by Carl B. 1961. I'm a 34-year-old stoner high school dropout. I spent most of my formative years goofing off, screwing around, and coasting through life without a care for the future. Like I thought the world was going to end the next day. When it became apparent that wasn't going to happen, when I finally matured somewhat and started taking things more seriously, it was already too late and I was woefully unprepared for facing life in the real world. My parents finally got fed up with my shenanigans and kicked me out at 26, giving me $1,000 in cash to get started and leaving me to fend for myself. I can't say I blame them. Who wants to spend the rest of their life supporting a freeloading slacker without any direction in life? I got a job in the city, found a relatively cheap apartment, and began taking online classes, eventually earning a GED. I work as an after-hours security guard in an office building in the city. I'm not going to tell you where exactly I live. The job's relatively easy. I sit in a small room for 12 hours a day looking at a bank of CCTV monitors, do a sweep of the building once every hour during my shift, and report any unusual activity on the phone to my supervisor at the district HQ. This job gives me a lot of downtime. Mostly I just sit on my ass watching YouTube videos on my phone and listening to music. Sounds like a great setup, right? Basically, I get paid to do nothing. Did I mention I was a security guard? The trade-off is I get paid shit. And it's not like there's a ton of room for career advancement in my line of work. Plus, living in this city isn't cheap. Between rent, utilities, groceries, and bus fare, I usually have about $20 in disposable income at the end of the month. So, when the old piece of shit RCA box TV I brought to my apartment from home finally went toes up, it's not like I could afford to buy a new one. I decided to go to the local Goodwill and see what they had to offer. Goodwill's a crazy place and you never know what you'll find there, what deals you might score. My luck was in that day and I immediately found a nearly brand new Samsung 7 Series Ultra HD flat screen with a 43-inch screen. Normally it costs over $300, but I was able to get it for only $60, which was still a bit more than I felt comfortable spending. I took my new purchase home and set it up, marveling at the crystal clear high-definition picture. It was easily the best $60 I ever spent. It didn't take me long to realize that there was something odd about my new TV, though. That night, my night off, I watched a new episode of a current hit network series. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the next morning, when I was on Facebook discussing the episode with the few friends I had made there, they had no idea what I was talking about when I described the plot. They told me last night's episode had been nothing like what I was describing. They told me I was nuts and suggested that maybe I'd been watching a different show by mistake. We argued about it for a while, then I signed out. I didn't really know or care about these people. I figured they were probably just trolling me for some kind of joke. Except that when I went to Wikipedia and read the synopsis for the episode in question, I was surprised to see they were right. Last night's episode had been the one they claimed to have seen, not the one I distinctly remembered seeing myself. I tried to explain it to myself by reasoning that maybe what I had seen had been a rerun of the show I hadn't seen before. Maybe I had been on the wrong channel or had fallen asleep without realizing it and dreamed the whole thing. I even thought that perhaps it had been a DVR the previous owners had left in the TV's programming or something. I shrugged it off and had pretty much forgotten about the entire incident by the time I had to leave for work. I worked my shift, got off at 4 a.m. The next morning, took the bus home and went straight to bed. Late the next morning, while eating a breakfast of cold Pop-Tarts and some reheated leftover coffee from the previous morning, yeah, I admit, I'm a bit of a slob. But hey, I'm a 30-something bachelor, give me a break. I flipped on my new TV and watched the news. The female newscaster had a solemn expression. Tragedy this morning downtown when the number C subway train derailed at 8:42 a.m., leaving a dozen people dead and 20 more critically injured. I changed the channel, not wanting to hear that depressing bullshit. I channel surfed for about an hour, not really paying much attention to anything I was seeing. There wasn't much interesting on, so I turned on Netflix and watched The Big Lebowski, one of my all-time favorites. I followed the less than spectacular adventures of the dude, Walter Donnie, for the next couple hours. And by then it was close to noon, so I turned off the TV and went to get some lunch and do some shopping before I had to leave for work later that afternoon. Later that day at work, I was down in the parking garage on my break, having a cigarette and shooting the shit with a garage attendant, a heavy-set, gray-haired older guy named Carl, who I kind of had made buddies with. In passing, I mentioned the subway accident earlier that morning and he gave me a puzzled look. He said he hadn't heard anything about any subway derailment that day. He asked me which train had derailed and I told him it had been the number C at 8:42 that morning. "You're crazy," he replied with a snort. "I took that train to work this morning at 8:30 and everything was just fine." I took out my phone to prove it to him and looked up that morning's news, but could find no mention of any subway derailments in the city. I got home early the next morning, feeling deeply troubled by what had happened. First, I had seen an episode of a TV show no one else had claimed it aired. Then I had heard a news broadcast about a subway accident that had apparently never happened. What the fuck was going on? Was I seeing things? Had I imagined it all? Maybe I just wasn't getting enough sleep or something. Or maybe there was some kind of glitch in that TV. Maybe it was showing me some old programming or something. And that subway derailment had actually happened in the past. I had some trouble getting to sleep that morning, feeling distinctly unsettled by what was going on. Nothing unusual happened for the next 5 days, mostly because I mainly watched movies and old syndicated shows on Netflix instead of current programming. I followed my usual weekly routine and had pretty much forgotten about the bizarre events of earlier that week by the time it was my night off and time for me to watch the same current TV series I'd watched a week before. It was another new episode, a follow-up to the plot of the previous weeks. I watched it nonchalantly, then went to bed. I woke the next morning to find my phone was packed with Facebook messages from the people in the group I'd belonged to. Some of them were amazed, some of them curious, some of them seemed downright disturbed, maybe even a little frightened. All their messages boiled down basically to the same thing. How the fuck had I known what the next episode was going to be about a week in advance? I was confused at first, then slowly it dawned on me. I did a quick search for the synopsis of last night's episode. It wasn't the episode I had seen the previous evening. It was the episode I had seen the week before. The episode they all argued hadn't aired. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I didn't answer any of their messages. In fact, I deleted my Facebook account right there and then. I sat there in bed for over an hour. Even then, I still tried to rationalize what had happened. None of the people I knew on Facebook lived in the same city I did. I knew most TV shows film all the new season's episodes well in advance. Maybe the satellite that provided the network feed to the people who lived in my area had screwed up and skipped an episode, showing me the one that was supposed to air after it. It actually kind of made sense to an extent. Even still, I didn't really feel in the mood for watching any TV that morning. I listened to music instead. While I did some much overdue chores, cleaning my apartment, doing my laundry, washing my dishes, then went downtown to run a few personal errands. Then I went to work and did my usual 12-hour routine of sitting on my ass in the security office, goofing off on my phone and occasionally checking the monitors to make sure there weren't any fires, burglars, or zombie serial killers in the building. I went down on my break to the parking garage to have my usual cigarette and make chit-chat with Carl. We stood around for about 10 minutes, smoking and making small talk, not really talking about anything important. I casually asked him if he watched the TV series I did, and he just grunted and shook his head. I can't stand TV shows about a bunch of privileged yuppie assholes whining about their problems. I can't relate to that shit. I just shrugged, and that was pretty much that. A few minutes later, my break was nearly up, so I put out my smoke and we said goodbye. I finished the rest of my shift, then went home and went to sleep. I spent most of the next morning and early afternoon playing video games. When I came into the building around 4, the manager was waiting for me with a grim expression. "What's up?" I asked him, concerned. "You didn't hear?" he asked me. "No. Hear what?" "Carl. The parking garage attendant's dead." I was shocked. "How? Didn't you see the news? He was killed in that subway train derailment this morning." I felt a sense of unreality wash over me, a feeling of déjà vu. I felt like I was having a dream. "What time did it happen?" I asked the manager, my voice sounding far away. "This morning at 8:42, he was on his way to work." "Which train was it?" I asked him, already knowing the answer. "The C train." For a second, I felt lightheaded. I thought I was going to faint. I willed myself to clear my head and get a grip. I thanked the manager for telling me, expressing sadness at Carl's death. I clocked in at 4, then went into the security room and sat there in front of the monitors. My mind was reeling. It was apparent what was happening, had been for some time, but I had been in denial before then. But now, in the face of Carl's death, I had to acknowledge the truth of it myself. The TV I had bought secondhand from a Goodwill store for $60 could somehow, some way, receive broadcasts from a week in the future. Could, in effect, predict the future. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, and frankly, I didn't care. I sat there dwelling on this, considering the ramifications of it all. I felt a kernel of wild excitement building up within me as I thought of the possibilities. I had to force it down and keep myself in check. I could tell everything that was going to happen a week before it actually did. Sports scores, the weather, politics, natural disasters, crime, accidents. The list went on and on. I felt a sense of guilt in there as well, that I had a chance of preventing Carl's death, but hadn't acted on it while I had the opportunity. But told myself that even if I had accepted what was going on before the subway accident and tried to warn him, he wouldn't have believed me anyway. I thought of the good I could do with my newfound powers to foresee future events. I could prevent crimes, save lives. I could learn the outcome of the next presidential election a week before everyone else did. I could even... A wild eye suddenly occurred to me and I bolted upright, galvanized with excitement at the tempting possibility of it. The Powerball lottery drawing was tonight at 11. The jackpot was currently at over $500 million. I debated it briefly in my mind, the morality and ethics of it, then said fuck it to morality and ethics. I called my supervisor and told him in no uncertain terms where he could insert my job, then left the office building for the last time, feeling giddy and almost whimsical. I took the bus back home, knowing that I wouldn't have to rely on shitty public transportation for much longer. In a couple more weeks, I would be driving myself around in a new Rolls Royce. I raced up to my apartment and turned on my miraculous new TV, waiting anxiously with a pad and pen as the hours passed, and 11 o'clock slowly crept around. I watched eagerly as the little plastic balls bounced around in their machine, jotting each of the lucky 6 on my pad as they rolled down the chute one by one into the clear glass tube. I stared in awe at the 6 numbers I had written down. In a week, I was going to be $500 million richer. I had finally discovered a way to rig the lottery that not only worked, but was perfectly legal. No one would ever know. I was rich, could finally start living the life I had always dreamed of. On TV, there was a sudden interruption. A special news report. A grim-faced newscaster sat at an anchor desk. He spoke solemnly, trying to remain composed on air, but his voice broke with an edge of panic several times as he spoke. This is a special Channel 13 news report. The White House has just released a statement. At approximately 9:27 Eastern Standard Time this morning, NASA detected an asteroid with a 100-mile diameter on a direct collision course with Earth. Scientists predict it will enter our atmosphere within the next week and impact with a velocity of 60 miles a second, causing worldwide extinction, and there's nothing that can be done about it. The end of the world is upon us. I stared at the TV in shock. This couldn't really be happening. I changed the channels rapidly. It was the same on all the other networks. One newscaster said that rioting and looting was already breaking out in all of the major cities as panic took hold of the streets. They then cut to the Pope at the Vatican leading the world in prayer, speaking in Italian, with an interpreter translating into English. "O our God, we are heartily sorry for having offended thee." I turned off the TV, feeling numb. I looked down at the now useless winning Powerball numbers I had written down. I tore up the piece of paper. I went to the window and looked out at the calm city street below, then up at the night sky above. I stood there for a while, lost in thought. Then I sighed, got out my phone and called up an old buddy of mine who used to score for me and also lived in the city. I told him I wanted an ounce of dank weed, and he said he could hook me up the next day. Why the fuck not? I thought to myself as I ended the call. Now was a good time as any to fall back into my old habits. I used to coast through life without a care for the future, like I thought the world was going to end soon. Now, I have an excuse. The Drowning Man by Mr. Outlaw. This is something that happened to me last summer. I'm opting to tell it now because, well, we're all cooped up indoors and I suppose there's no better time. Also, perhaps telling it will be somehow cathartic, but I doubt that. To this day, I can't find an explanation for what happened. In fact, I can't even fathom there being an explanation that I'll ever understand. I was camping with a few friends. We weren't terribly deep in the woods or anything. In fact, there was another campsite set up maybe 200 to 300 meters away from us. For the first few days, calling it a great time would have been an understatement. We were having a fucking blast. Exams were finally over, and we were blowing off steam any way we could. There were 5 of us in total. Neil, James, Curtis, Ahmed, and Steve. Me. Real sausage fest, I know. There was a lake within walking distance of our campsite, and I found myself sitting on the shore during the 3rd night. Curtis and I were smoking while talking about our final year of uni and the future ahead of us. It had been quite the tumultuous year, after all. After a while, Curtis left to hit on the girls at the campsite near us. I stayed for a bit after, listening to music while looking up at the stars. At some point, I noticed water rippling onto the shore. I froze for a moment. I couldn't imagine somebody actually being on the lake. I took my headphones out and heard the sound of splashing water. It sounded frenetic, almost like somebody was drowning. I sat up and looked, shocked at the sight ahead of me. Sure enough, there was somebody out there, maybe 50 meters away from the shore, seemingly struggling to stay afloat. It looked like an adult man, but I couldn't tell from so far. But it certainly wasn't a child. What the hell, I thought? Of course, the first conclusion I came to was that my friends were playing a trick on me. It was definitely something they'd do, after all. Fucked up, I know. I mean, it was nearly midnight. Who the hell else could it be? "Oh, come on," I yelled out. "You'd think I'd fall for that?" The figure just kept splashing around. Soon enough, I started getting worried. At that point, it was either saving my pride or letting somebody drown to death. If it was one of my friends, then I'd just get them back later. "Hang on!" I yelled out before jumping in. I wasn't the best swimmer, but I was certainly competent enough. I was confident that I'd be able to lug this guy to shore. Nevertheless, my lack of goggles, combined with the fact that it was nearly pitch black outside, did make things a bit harder. Eventually, I stopped in order to make sure I was moving the right way. However, he was gone. There was no more splashing. I panicked for a moment, thinking that I'd acted too late. But then I realized something even more horrifying. I was able to stand. The water went up to my chest, and I was only about 5'6" or 167 centimeters tall. I looked back at the shore, realizing that I was just about 50 meters out. What the hell, I thought to myself? A chill ran up the back of my spine as the implication set in. It was a different kind of fear than what I was used to, an abstract fear, something I was completely unfamiliar with. I stood still for a moment. For some reason, I was hoping that my mind had somehow conjured up the whole thing, that I'd been seeing things, a visceral hallucination. Or maybe I was just too scared to move. Maybe they were just waiting for me to swim away. And they'd grab onto my ankle with their clammy hands as soon as I tried. I'm not sure how long I waited. It was probably under a minute, even though it felt like far longer. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. But then it happened. A splash from behind me. I'd never swam faster in my life. As I got within 10 meters of the shore, that thing finally caught up. Its hands were cold and scaly as they wrapped around my foot. I began thrashing wildly, eventually managing to kick it off in desperation. During the struggle, I caught a glimpse of it. The pale moonlight could only illuminate so much, but its features were still something that could hardly be forgotten. Gray, scaly skin, seaweed-like hair, empty eye sockets, an empty, gaping mouth curled into a wide, sadistic grin. It seemed to be laughing under the water, but no air bubbles were rising up. It took all of my mental strength to not faint on the spot. At that point, the water was only waist deep, so I started running. Thankfully, I got away. I stumbled onto the shore, just about ready to pass out from exhaustion. I stared back at the lake, praying that it wouldn't walk out. I watched as the ripples in the water began to fade, before dissipating altogether. The lake's surface was once again smooth, calm, as if nothing had happened at all. For a few moments after, I was inclined to believe it, that the whole situation was just a horrifying hallucination. But I couldn't hold on to that delusion forever. My foot had been cut from when it had grabbed me. There was no escaping the reality. I walked back to the campsite and slept in the truck that night, firmly clutching the shotgun that we'd brought. I didn't tell any of my friends about it. However, I made damn sure we steered clear from the lake. I told them that I'd found some used needles and condoms near the shore. That sure as hell did the trick. I decided to walk into town the following afternoon, just to get further away from the lake for a bit. I entered a small shop to get an energy drink, since I didn't get a wink of sleep the previous night. I suppose the cashier, an older man appearing to be in his 60s, could sense something in my expression. "You look like you've just seen the devil, son. You got a story for me?" he asked. I chuckled nervously and shook my head. "Nah, it's nothing, just a bad dream, I guess." The man was clearly seeing through my lies. He grinned before continuing. "I've been around for longer than you've been alive. It's never just a nightmare. You saw something, didn't you? Come on, I'll believe you." I exhaled before telling him what I'd seen. He listened and nodded, a grave expression on his face while doing so. "Hang on. Let me make a call," He went on to tell me about a serial killer that had been known to lure his victims into the lake by pretending to drown, only to drown them himself once they got close. Apparently, he'd been inactive for some time, but my story seemed to change that fact. The police should be around to scan the area soon. You want to stick around for a bit? They might want to talk to you about it. Text whoever you're with in the meantime. Warn them. I just nodded. I didn't say anything, but that explanation didn't seem quite right to me. A serial killer? In other words, just a regular man. It sure as hell didn't seem like a regular man to me. I tried rationalizing it though. Perhaps everything that happened was real, and I'd interpreted it wrong. Maybe it truly was just some psycho killer in that lake, and his strange appearance was a product of my frenetic mind. That was the explanation that I decided to settle on at that time. The cops came and I talked to them, describing exactly what I'd seen, barring the more otherworldly details. They thanked me and began patrolling the area. To my surprise, it only took a few hours for them to catch somebody. James Rollison, the notorious serial killer known for drowning people that the cashier had described to me. He'd been positively linked to at least 3 deaths in surrounding towns, and had apparently come back for more. The officers asked me if I recognized him as the man that had tried pulling me into the lake. But as much as I wanted that to be the case, it wasn't. I couldn't recognize him. The only thing that I could remember were those empty eyes and that scaly skin. I was silent for a while before an officer chimed in on my behalf. You don't have to answer, kid. This scumbag can't hurt you anymore. I don't know if I imagined what happened next or what, but I could swear that right before James was dragged into the cop car, he grinned at me something sinister. A grin that I nearly recognized as the one that'd been leering at me from beneath the water. But it disappeared from his face just about as quickly as it appeared. I shivered and made my way back to the campsite. The cops said they'd stay nearby in case anything else came up, which did allow me to relax, but only a little bit. At that point, I was just counting down the minutes until we were supposed to leave the next morning. Our last night would have been fun, I suppose. Curtis had managed to convince the girls at the other campsite to come hang out with us. They were cute as hell, still. I couldn't really enjoy anything. I couldn't stop thinking that person. But he was gone, right? There shouldn't have been a reason to worry so much. But no, I couldn't stop. Man, you're looking down, Curtis said, grinning at me. Still thinking about Angela? Angela was my ex, and no, I wasn't thinking about her for obvious reasons. I know what'll cheer you up, he continued. Ladies, what do you say we take a dip in the lake? They all cheered at the idea. I could feel my stomach sink. Dude, I told you that lake's dirty as fuck. What if we step on a needle or something? Oh, come on, dude. We have sandals for a reason. Before I could get another word out, he'd taken off, along with everybody else. Come on, man, he yelled back at me. I hate seeing you like this. I took a deep breath before pulling myself up. Nothing to worry about, I thought. Nothing to worry about. I didn't even believe what I was telling myself. Regardless, I caught up to the group and found myself standing back in front of the lake. Even though everybody was having a blast, I still couldn't. I just kept scanning the water. I was looking for any signs of it. Him. Whatever the hell had grabbed me that night. Hey! One of the girls nudged me. You drink too much or something? If you need somebody to hold your hair back while you puke, I'm your girl. I laughed. I'm fine, but I'll keep that in mind. As the night went on, I began loosening up. Midnight passed and nothing had happened. Everything seemed fine. I was even starting to enjoy myself. But then, it happened again. Hey, what's going on over there? I followed my gaze to his. Oh no. Somebody was drowning about 50 meters away from us. Jesus, Curtis said. Don't worry about him, I'll get him. No, Curtis, don't. Dude, I'll be fine, don't worry about it, he replied. The water, it's shallow. That person's not in trouble. Jeez, man, do you hear yourself? I'm not gonna let him die, all right? I couldn't do anything else before he swam off. I went after him, but he was far faster than me. Just like before, the drowning man disappeared as soon as Curtis reached him. He stopped swimming and stood confused. What the hell, he said. Where'd they go? Curtis! I was basically shrieking at this point. Get away from there! I blinked once and he was abruptly dragged into the water. What happened next was too blurry for me to recall exactly. I remember diving after him, only to find no traces of anybody. The cops came at one point, due to how much I was yelling. We searched hours for him, scouring the lake as thoroughly as possible. It wasn't even that big. If he was there, then he should have turned up. The cops had a hard time coming up with an explanation, of course. They settled on drowning as the cause for the time being. Not that it made any fucking sense. Curtis knew how to swim. The deepest part of the lake was only 177 centimeters. He was 186 centimeters tall. As for James, well, he hadn't escaped. He was in custody while it happened. I can't explain what transpired that night. It might be something beyond understanding at all. I can't believe I lost a friend that night. I drove back out to the lake a few nights ago. The entire place was empty. I'm not sure what I was trying to do, what I was trying to learn, if anything at all. I stared out at the water for hours, well past midnight. The drowning man didn't make another appearance. However, something did wash up on shore. It was almost like a taunt. A sandal. The same one Curtis was wearing that night.